Hey, welcome back everybody. It is Chris Nichols here from Bow River Trout Fitters, and it occurs to me that we've done a video on how to set up your fly reel, but we haven't done a video yet on a beginner's guide to how to purchase a reel and what you're really looking for when you are looking at these beautiful devices here. So at their most basic, a fly fishing reel is just a place to store your backing for your capacity to fish with, and then your fly line itself on your fly rod. And to some degree, especially like this Able TR, fly reels can just be jewelry. They can be eye candy. They can just be something beautiful that complements your fly rod, or they could just be completely functional. But today we're really going to get into a lot of the ins and outs of what to look for and which reel to buy for your particular application. Okay, so let's start at the beginning, the construction of your actual reel. Now, pretty much all fly reels nowadays are made out of aluminum, but more affordable bargain reels will be made out of cast aluminum versus machined aluminum out of bar stock. And what's the difference? I mean, first in practical terms, cast reels are more affordable to make, absolutely. They'll tend to have more simplistic designs, although as you can see with this Redington Run, they can still be really nicely ported and very lightweight. Whereas machined aluminum bar stock, you can really go wild with the machining. Beautiful, intricate designs, very thin porting. Sometimes they'll be even a little bit lighter weight. Now, one thing that we do say in the industry is that cast reels tend to be a little bit more brittle versus machined aluminum. Although, to be honest, in practical terms, we don't really see that much of a difference. If you drop a cast reel hard enough to actually crack the casting, that would have also done major damage to a machined aluminum reel as well. So just don't drop your reels. Okay, so another aspect of construction that you'll often hear with fly reels is the drag. Is it sealed or unsealed? And basically what this just means is the drag part of the reel that puts friction down on the fish as it's trying to pull line, does it let water inside it, or is it fully and hermetically sealed? Now, a click and pull reel like this has exposed internals, so by its nature it is not sealed. Something like this Galvin fly reel, these don't technically have a hermetically sealed drag, but they're still designed to stand up to a lot of abuse. And then you do have reels like this where the drag never sees water or sand at all. It's fully sealed. The benefits there really come down to whether you can use this reel for freshwater or saltwater applications. Ideally, saltwater applications, you want a fully sealed drag because that salt water is very corrosive and you just don't want it getting into those delicate elements. That being said, these Galvin fly reels, although not technically fully sealed, are absolutely fine for saltwater use. Another aspect is going to be the actual finish itself. Because saltwater is so corrosive, you want to have anodized finishes that are really rugged to stand up to that corrosive element. Regardless, any saltwater reel should be thoroughly rinsed in fresh water at the end of the day. It's largely going to depend on your application whether you need a saltwater capable reel or a freshwater reel. So another aspect of construction that's very important is the actual physical size of the reel itself. And this has to do not only with how wide the spool is, but what the diameter of the reel is. So a small reel like this is designed to balance a 3 or 4 weight rod, and balance really is the key. Ideally, when you have a reel loaded up with fly line and backing and you put it on your rod, you want the point of balance to be just under your hand on the cork so that it's not falling towards the tip or to the back of the rod. That's ideal, and you do have some leeway and preference a little bit around there. Also, just the actual fly line you're using. This small reel is designed so that if I put a 3 or 4 weight fly line on it with backing, it'll fill that appropriately. Whereas a reel like this that's much larger, this is made for 8, 9, or 10 weight fly lines, and that makes more sense because I got more capacity to store that much physically thicker fly line. The last thing that I'll say here about size is capacity. Capacity is important, but if I'm fishing for trout, the amount of backing that I have on a small reel like this is going to be generally between 50 to 100 yards. It really does depend on the manufacturer of the reel. 50 to 100 yards is plenty for trout. It's rare that a trout will even take you into the backing beyond your fly line, and even if they do, they're generally not going to take up to 50 or 100 yards. It just really doesn't happen. So that's not a concern. But if I'm fishing for saltwater species or steelhead or salmon, fish that can feasibly run long distances, then I want a reel that's going to have 200 plus yards of capacity, sometimes even approaching 300 yards or more. And then it's important to have a reel with the right capacity for those big fish. So the last thing I want to talk about in terms of construction of your fly reel is the cage itself. And a lot of fly reels are going to be like this. This is what we call an open cage reel. And you can see it's completely open. The spool is separate and then they come together like this. Open cage reels are nice because they're very lightweight. I mean, that is a nice advantage of them. But in some situations, especially with very thin running lines or backing like you would have on a spey rod, you can often get that catching inside the foot here and getting trapped in between the cage and the spool itself, which is obviously obviously not desirable. It's a rare occurrence, but it does happen. Then there are reels that are designed to be called full cage, and here you can see that the spool is fully encased in the cage. Once that fly line and backing are coming out between these two pillars, there's nothing for them to get trapped in while the reel is going. And so that's very important, especially with large fish that are running fast. You don't want to have a hang up and lose a fish like that. And here's just another example of that full cage reel, and you can see how that fully encloses the spool when I click them together. You could also talk about an advantage with full cage reels being that they're a little bit more rigid, a little bit stronger, but again, as we said before, don't drop your reels. All right, next let's talk about different kinds of drag. So as I talked about earlier, there's something called a click and pawl reel. This is a very classic style of reel. These are the VR design reels that we got in. And the click and pawl just has a metal clicker to provide some resistance to the fly line going out. So one characteristic of click and pawls is they're very simple, they're very rugged, there's very little maintenance required, and they do have a bright sound to them. Some people love it, some people hate it, but that's what click and pawl reels sound like. You can get these either unadjustable like you'll find on the smaller reels or on the larger reels with an actual drag knob that can change the adjustment and the resistance of the click and pawl there. Often these will also have exposed spools, so I can even put my fingers on the actual spool as it's turning to provide extra resistance. Click and pawl reels are very simple, they're very classic, and they're very beautiful, and that's why we do love them. But the vast majority of fly fishing reels use what's called a disc drag. So this is discs enclosed inside the reel, usually made of different materials like cork or Rulon or carbon fiber. It doesn't really matter. I mean, they all do the same thing. And the idea is this: as you get more drag adjustment put down on the knob, you're just putting more friction on those discs together. And the more friction on the discs, the more resistance there is for the fly line to leave the reel, and thus more resistance transferred to the fish. Now, the idea of drag on a fly reel is that if you've got a fish that's running and you want to tire it out sooner, you can put more resistance on the fish by clamping down on that drag. But to be honest, in most situations with trout or fish similar to trout, we generally don't adjust the drag to provide more resistance. It's usually not necessary. What we like to do with the drag is actually set it just strong enough so you don't get overspooling of the fly line. And overspooling is when I pull out fly line. Maybe I'm going to make a bigger cast, so I yank out fly line, and if my drag is set too light, it unrolls just based on the momentum of that pull, and I get these big loops and they can get caught and make a nasty mess. So I generally set the drag tight enough so that when I pull fly line out, there's not so much resistance that it's inconvenient, but at the same time, it doesn't unspool the line. Okay, so in the case of fishing for something like trout, I'm generally using lighter tippet and stuff. I don't want to crank this drag down too much anyways, but even if I do torque it down, I can still turn against that resistance fairly easily. But what if I'm fishing stronger tippet for big fish like bonefish, permit, tarpon, or large freshwater species like steelhead and salmon? These are very powerful fish. I need the extra capacity in the backing. That's where we talked about having that sort of 200 yards plus. And I also do want a strong drag that can really put the gears to those fish. So something like this Lamson Liquid Max, if I turn this down all the way, you can see how much muscle power I actually have to use to make this thing reverse. And so in a situation like that, that's where I really want to have the right reel for the right job. All right, so I hope that helps you guys understand fly reels a little bit better and gives you a better idea of what you need to shop for your particular applications. And in closing, it really does come down to your application. I mean, if you're going to do a lot of saltwater fishing for strong fish, well, you absolutely want something that's got a sealed drag, lots of capacity, and balances those big rods properly with a strong enough drag to really slow down those fish. If you're fishing for steelhead and salmon, again, it's a pretty similar story, although your drag doesn't necessarily have to be fully sealed. But if you're fishing for trout or fish that are like trout, smaller fish like that, these smaller reels, you just want to pick something that's going to balance the rod. Capacity is honestly not really that big a deal. And you really want to treat this like an accessory, like eye candy. Choose something that has the right color to match your rod or that sounds a certain way that you like. I mean, that's really where the fun is. Also, remember that flyer reels, they come across many different price ranges for many different budgets. So don't feel like you have to break the bank unless there's a reel that you really like the look of. Anyways, guys, hope you guys enjoyed this. Leave your comments below. Let us know if you have any questions about flyer reels. We'd be happy to answer that in the comment section below. And of course, do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks so much for watching us. We'll see you soon with more on Bow River Trout Fitters.